everyone, and thank you for joining me and joining us today. I'm Barnard Crespi, and with me I have Steve Porter, CEO at SecuredNet Solutions and a recognized QSA and PCI expert. Today we'll be diving into a really important and practical topic: how to reduce your PCI scope and how to descope certain business processes altogether. So if you're looking for ways to simplify compliance and lower your risk, you're at the right place. So let's just jump into it. Hi, Steve. How are you doing?
Good morning, Bernard. I'm doing well, thank you.
So I know this, we've talked a lot about PCI scope. Do you want to take a few moments to just explain to our audience what we're referring to?
Thank you. And I concur with everything you just said about scoping being probably one of the most important parts of PCI. It's probably the most difficult sometimes. Uh, Scoping in general just it refers to the inclusion of all systems, processes, and people that would be considered part of your PCI environment and or PCI assessment. And sometimes this, can tend to be a little bit more than it needs to be, or perhaps it's a little bit less because you don't recognize what all of your scope is. But hey, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, so why don't we'll get
No,
into
that's
some
that's fine. I mean, I think it's important to actually have a clear definition
questions.
as to what scope is. Would you say it's fair to say any systems, people, processes, infrastructure that touches any credit card information from the point that the customer walks in through the door, whether it be online, phone, or at the store?
Yes, you hit it right on the head. It's people, process, and technology that either transmit, stores, processes, or can affect the security of a credit card transaction.
So because today we're going to be talking about how to descope, it's important to actually try to understand that, uh, how, when you're looking at scope reduction, meaning how do we compress the business processes?
Mhm.
What are you looking at? What are you advising customers, particularly, when you have customers who are doing the same thing in possibly two, three different ways, right? So for instance, you have and I've seen this in several times. I'm sure you have as well. They get a phone call and they're going to start capturing the credit card information. Sometimes they log into the virtual terminal, which is one channel. Then sometimes they're going to put it into they call it a device that they also have. That's another channel. What are you recommending your clients do? And I try to understand, maybe explain how each one of these channels increase the scope, increase the effort, and what you usually tell your customers to do in these scenarios.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I just want to clarify first when we talk about channels, of course, we are talking about a payment channel, right? So
Yes.
everything from the second that a cardholder provides their card information all the way back to you send this off to your bank for processing. Um, we normally see organizations like the first year that they're going to do a PCI assessment. There's sometimes a very diverse selection of payment channels in a company because you know companies grow over time, things change, but old methods don't always get deprecated or closed down. So the scenario you described is very prominent. We could see, like you said, maybe they have somebody walk in with a card or they call in with the card and then they do it one way or another just because all the options are available. So in a de-scoping exercise, one of the things that we do is we sit down with our clients and say, hey, do you really need all of these? And if not, why are they still there? And to validate whether they need it, it often comes down to just a numbers game. Meaning, well, if you take it over the phone, how many annually do you do that way? Is that a viable means for you? A lot of companies in retail, for instance, have the knuckle busters we used to call them, right? The old cards wipes, the carbon copies. Um, they have those as backups for when the internet used to fail. Well, that doesn't really fail anymore, but they still have this backup method. Do they really need it? Do they really use it? And sometimes you can eliminate things just by looking at how often it's used over the course of a 12-month period, for example.
So reduction. So eh, do you we always talk about convenience, and
Mhm.
sometimes how it undermines security, because we tend to actually do whatever's most convenient. And I know that one of the biggest challenges why these, and you probably, you've been doing this for a couple of decades already. Uh, but
Thanks.
you probably see pardon me?
Thanks.
Yeah. But it's, I'm just saying you've seen so many different use cases and so many instances where they're doing the same thing in multiple ways, and it's just
Mhm.
whatever is more convenient. And it's important. Maybe you can share with us, when you're call it descoping or reducing the scope, how does that reduce the year after year effort of PCI?
So there's no simple answer, unfortunately, but I guess the common thread would be the less scope you have, the less effort that's required for an assessment. The more simplified the environment, the quicker things tend to progress when that annual assessment comes around. There's less complications. You're not digging around and saying, oh, well, how many transactions do we have on this method and how many on that method? And are we still using this? And did that channel change or did this one change? Because remember, every single one of these payment channels uses possibly a different type of technology. Well, now that's a different piece of technology that you have to maintain, monitor, keep updated, all of this different stuff throughout the year in order to maintain or, sorry, to retain that PCI compliance. If you start removing some of this and reducing that scope, your assessments can become very easy.
So this is interesting because, I mean, as the more mature organizations are, and I'm sure you've seen this as much as I have. I mean, you always call it PCI creep, but you start
Yeah.
seeing that there's all these processes that many, you know, they should know that which they are, but they've been built over time, and someone, came up with one process. Well, the other one still exists and is being used occasionally, which what I'm
Mhm.
hearing is that, well, that's now call it as a compound effect as to how big your effort's going to be on your PCI because you need to account for all of them. So there's really a return from what I'm hearing. There's a really good return on the investment and
Mhm.
time of spending time looking at everything of how you're doing business and how you're accepting cards with the ultimate goal of let's see what we do not need or where we have a lot of duplicates. So it's not, a silver lining of this PCI process is not just, reduce risk. It's going to be easier. It's the fact that we're actually going to clean up our environments and that to your point, I mean, that will make the assessment, or if you're doing a self-assessment, it will make it a lot simpler year after year.
100%. One of the things we used to see quite a bit, and we still see it from time to time, but I think most organizations have a better handle on it these days, is the whole shadow IT thing, where a department is like, oh, we can't do it that way; it's too hard. We're just going to pull out a credit card and go set up a Stripe account, and we'll accept payments that way. Well, not realizing that now that Stripe process, that service, as well as the people that are using it on your team are now all considered in scope for PCI. But it's another payment channel. So now you've
Yeah,
increased it. That's the creep we talk about.
yeah, yeah. I love. You always tell me about that. You use the word shadow IT and shadow
Yeah,
payments, and I love when you actually use that terminology because that is very common.
it is.
And for those listening in, is this exercise of first start identifying how you're handling payments. But before you start actually going and start filling out self-assessment questionnaires or working with, QSAs to go through a full assessment, is which business processes are duplicate in many
Mhm.
instances, and which ones you could do without. It's all really about comes up if we talk about um, it's about efficiency. And
Right.
the more time we spend on efficiency from a payment perspective, the lower the scope. Well, let's call it it's a more reduced scope. And then long term, again, I'm going to go to long term goals, means the effort towards and the amount of time spent is going to be a lot less.
There's one other factor as well, Bernard, that's outside of PCI, really, is you think about it, every single one of these payment channels that gets set up by an organization, I mean, they're not free. So there's additional business cost to it as well
Yeah,
that sometimes comes to light in these scope discovery sessions.
yeah, yeah. And in your experience, I mean, are there any these, and I call it, I love your term shadow IT. Are there any ones that stand out that you have actually come up with, and that even the clients have actually been surprised that these processes exist within their organization?
Oh, for sure. We were working with a client one year that they used to do a lot of conferences, and they were selling and selling product at these conferences. And well, they didn't think that the payment terminal that they got from Stripe or Square, or I'm just using them as an example,
Yeah, of course.
would be considered in scope because, oh, it's just a one-off. We use it for a couple of days at the conference. It's like, yeah, but how many transactions did you do, and how you know how did you consider that when you looked at your PCI assessment? Like, well, we didn't. It's not in scope because XYZ company said it wasn't. I was like,
I will-
you might want to rethink that, because you're still accepting the funds at the end of the day. You're still performing the transaction. Your staff are performing the transactions. And you
yeah,
have an agreement with that organization, whether it's Stripe or Square or whomever, that says, hey, you're going to be PCI compliant as well. So those are usually the
well,
ones that catch people without, without any consideration, really.
so what I hear, it's super important to start looking at how, and again, without getting to technicalities of the word scope, is start identifying how you as an organization are accepting payments.
Correct.
And not just, oh, I'm accepting them online, but if you are, how are you doing that? Or I'm accepting them over the phone. Well, map out how you're doing that. So if you have one department going to a virtual terminal and the same department occasionally goes to a terminal that you always have, each one of them is considered a payment channel. Right. So therefore, if following your logic that you were describing before, is that because each one is a payment channel, each one has their own requirements, and you need to document each one of them, which means you have
Mhm.
a bigger scope. And the goal here would be compress that, make it, decide, are you going to use this one or are you going to use that one? Because that long term, that means every year is going to be easy. It becomes an easier than the first year because the first year you need to account for both of them.
Correct. Yeah, and also, I mean, in doing that exercise of drawing out or mapping out all the different ways that you accept payments, you're actually taking care of one of the most critical requirements of PCI in establishing your data flow diagram. Now, I won't get into all that technicality, but it's one of the key pieces that really helps us to understand a new client when we work with them, to help the client even understand how they're accepting payments. Because to your point, sometimes this is a bit of a surprise. Like, wow, I didn't know we were doing this in 10 different ways. We thought it was only three. So there's some pretty interesting and fun discussions that come out of those exercises.
Well, it's interesting because I call it a more layman's way of talking about PCI scope is really talking about the payment workflows or
Hmm.
flows that you have and what
Yes,
are the different payment flows. So how does information and how important this is, and this is, it could be as easy as I'm just saying, as drawing this in a piece of paper, as to, go around the organization, figure out how people are accepting payments,
I'm
ask
I'm a
finance
big
teams.
I'm a
Pardon me?
big fan of stickman diagrams, okay, where you
Yes,
have a
yes.
stickman holding a credit card and they pick up a phone or they go to a website or they walk in person, and it doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to capture the different ways you do your processing.
So the goal of the descoping and the scope reduction and the whatever we want to call it, sometimes we call it compressing the scope, is
Hmm.
really about making that stickman diagram smaller. And if
Yes.
you can't fit it into one page, and if it's two pages, let's see how we can actually compress that, because ultimately that will make your efforts into, year after year into PCI is going to reduce your effort. I mean, that's really where a lot of the return on your time, on that initial return on your time, is going to be in.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say if it's more than a page or 2 pages or whatever that's outrageous. I mean, large organizations can and will have very complex environments. So I wouldn't I don't know if I draw that limitation, but make sure that it's relevant to the size of your organization, perhaps.
Organization. Yeah. But here's an important point to leave behind is, if you don't have this diagrams today,
Mhm.
it's important that you begin. That's one very, call it one of the first steps that you can get started on, is start diagramming what your payment flows are.
Absolutely.
I was actually, we've talked to a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, healthcare providers, and what we actually sometimes, many times we ask is, can you share with us what's your payment flow? Well,
Hmm.
that's before my time. And if I understand, one of the very key requirements to your point is the data flows, that is one of the most basic requirements of PCI, is having that.
Absolutely.
So this exercise will help you, let's call it, compress, understand exactly how payments flow within your organization. And I think from a business, a silver lining behind this as well, from a business perspective, it helps you be more efficient. So it's almost like PCI is forcing you in a way to become much more efficient as an organization.
I think so. I mean, a lot of the requirements of PCI and a lot of the things that they're asking you to do or to meet as a requirement, these are really entry level or base level, I guess, security in some ways, right? I don't want to confuse people and say that security equals compliance or compliance equals security. They are two
Yes.
different beasts, but there is some overlap. And having having a lot of the requirements that PCI looks for will definitely help to move your organization forward.
Yeah, and that's it. I will say that's the silver lining, because
Mhm.
I've heard a lot about the burden, how difficult it is, and I hear this from, and that's more not understanding, but there is a business value as part of the process, because there is a lot of logic to, the requirements of PCI.
Yeah, I mean, shameless plug, but if you have a good partner in QSA that can help you kind of navigate through it, it's not that heavy of a lift. It shouldn't be anyway, and it should be very straightforward. So,
I'm glad you leave us with that thought, Steve, because it is true. I mean, it does not have to be a difficult exercise. I think what makes it the most difficult is not having, like you said, a partner to walk with you through the
mhm,
process, because the process can, in fact, if properly managed, can be not as painful as many may think it is.
mhm.
Um, so I think, Steve, I think we've covered this topic quite well. I want to thank you again for joining us, for always sharing with us your insight. This is Barnard Crespi. And for now, I wanted to thank you for listening and for your participation.